Hello, welcome to this video. And in this video, I'm going to study a little bit of economics. And the book which I have selected for discussion is Frank Heinemann Knight's Ethics of Competition. And I really like these chapters in this book. The first chapter is Ethics and the Economic Interpretation. It's a 20 pages chapter. The second chapter is the ethics of competition. It's quite big, 35 pages. And the third chapter is economic psychology and the value problem. So, but my favorite chapter for today is uh, let's go to page number 186. Or should we start just generally? Okay, let's start generally. No need to do a lot in a few days. Since our focus should be on always competition, we should study what uh, the ethics of competition is. Okay, bearing on this problem of scope and method, both economics and ethics deal with value. Economics as a pure science has given too little attention to separation of constants from variables, sense in which wants can be considered as data. Economic interpretation as a theory of conduct. Are human motives predominantly economic? Are they predominantly instinctive? The adaptation theory, the pleasure theory, economics as a study of the adaptation of means to ends. What becomes of ethics? The kinds of treatment of conduct. Certain aspects of the doctrine of the economic interpretation form a natural and convenient avenue of approach to a consideration of the relations between economics and ethics, and throw light on the scope and method of both these divisions of knowledge. It is this it is this more general problem which is the object of attack in the present paper, which is not primarily an attempt to make a contribution to the technical discussion of the famous theory named in the title. This theory is useful for present purposes because it suggests the fundamental question as to whether there is really a place in the scheme of thought for an independent ethics, or whether ethics should be displaced by a sort of higher economics. Economics and ethics naturally come into rather intimate relations with each other since both recognizedly deal with the problem of value. Two of these lines of relation are especially interesting in their bearing upon the vexed problem of scope and method in economics. In the first place, the separation between theory and practice, or between science and art, offers special difficulties in this field for reasons which it would carry us away from our central theme to elaborate here. The unfortunate but familiar result of this fact is that economists have spent much of their energy in disputations as to whether the science is properly concerned with facts and cause and effect relations, or with welfare. In other provinces of science, such controversies would seem absurd. There is another and deeper source of confusion in the conception of the method of economics, which also involves the relation between economics and ethics, and which will deal directly into the problem of this paper. It relates to the ultimate data of economics, regarded as a pure science dedicated to the search for truth and purified of all prejudices as to the goodness or badness of its principles and results. In this respect also, economics has been far behind the natural sciences. Insufficient attention has been given to the separation between constants and variables. Needless controversy and wasted effort have resulted from overlooking the fact that constants from one point of view may be variables from another, particularly that factors which are sensibly constant over short periods of time must be treated as variables when longer periods are under discussion. Of the various sorts of data dealt with in economics, no group is more fundamental or more universally and unquestioningly recognized as such than human wants. Yet one main purpose of the present discussion is to raise a serious question as to the sense in which these wants can be treated as data or whether even they are properly scientific data at all. We propose to suggest that these wants, which are the common starting point of economic reasoning, are, from a more critical point of view, the most obstinately unknown of all the unknowns in the whole system of variables with which economic science deals. The answer to this question of whether and in what sense wants are data will be found to involve a clarification of the nature of economics as a science, of the nature of ethics, and of the relations between the two. If human wants are data in the ultimate sense for scientific purposes, it will appear that there is no place for ethical theory in the sense in which ethicists have conceived that subject, but that its place must be taken by economics. It will be interesting to observe that, in view of a logically correct distinction between ethics and economics, the great majority of economists not only, but in addition no small proportion of thinkers calling themselves ethicists have not really believed in ethics in any other sense than that of a more or less glorified economics. To state the fundamental issue briefly at the outset are the motives with which economics has to do, which is to say human motives in general, wants, desires of a character which can adequately be treated as facts in the economic sense, in the scientific sense, or are they values or odds of an essentially different character, not amenable to scientific description or logical manipulation. For if it is the intrinsic nature of a thing to grow and change, it cannot serve as a scientific data. A science must have a static subject matter. It must talk about things which will stay put, otherwise its statements will not remain true after they are made, and there will be no point to make them. Economics has always treated desires or motives as facts of a character susceptible to statement in propositions and sufficiently stable during the period of the activity which they prompt to be treated as causes of that activity in a scientific sense. It has thus viewed life as a process of satisfying desires. If this is true, then life is a matter of economics. Only if it is untrue, or a very inadequate view of the truth, only if the creation of value is distinctly more than the satisfaction of desire, is there room for ethics in a sense logically separable from economics. In a more or less obscure and indirect way, the treatment of wants as data from which and with which to reason has already been challenged more than once. More or less conscious misgivings on this point underlie the early protests made by economists of the historical variety against the classical deductive economics, and the same is true in a more self-conscious way of the criticism brought by the modern historicism, the institutional economics of Veblen, Hamilton, and G. M. Clark. Thus, especially Clark, whose position most resembles that herein taken, observes that the wants which impel economic activity and which it is directed towards satisfying are the products of the economic process itself. In a single business establishment, one department furnishes the desires, which the other departments are to satisfy. Hitherto, the chief emphasis has been placed on the factual instability of wants and their liability to be changed as well as satisfied by business activity. A tendency to regard the growth of wants as unfortunate and the manufacture of new ones as an evil, what have not advertising and salesmanship to answer for at the hands of Veblen, for example. From the standpoint of hedonism, which is to say, of the economic philosophy of life, this conclusion is undoubtedly correct. If the good is satisfaction, there are no qualitative differences, no higher and lower as between wants, and that is better which is smaller and most easily appeased. Is not on any sentimental or idealistic ground, but as a plain question of the facts as to how the ordinary man conceives his own wants and interprets them in conduct which we shall argue against this view of the matter. Wants, it is suggested, not only are unstable, changeable in response to all sorts of influences, but is their essential nature to change and grow. It is an inherent inner necessity in them. The chief thing which the common-sense individual actually wants is not satisfaction for the wants which he has, but more and better wants. The things which he strives to get in the most immediate sense are far more what he thinks he ought to want than what his untutored preferences prompt. This feeling for what one should want, in contrast with actual desires, is stronger in the unthinking than in those sophisticated by education. It is the latter who argues himself into the tolerant attitude of "de gustibus non disputandum". The man in the street is more likely to view the individual whose tastes are wrong as a scurvy fellow who ought to be despised if not beaten up or shot.